I think data rights is what will drive massive differentiation for AI models. And those AI models that have better differentiated data sets will drive much higher leverage and upside for the market. Whatever data rights are being acquired today for unique data sets is times infinite when the AI starts using those data sets.
Hello, fellow daters. My guest is Oleg Rogynskyy. Oleg is the founder and CEO of People.ai, a AI-powered revenue platform. He's also an advisor to the Ministry of Digital Transformation for the country of Ukraine. Oleg, welcome to World of DaaS.
Auren, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. Now, People.ai it's founded like 8 years ago, 2016, way before this kind of current wave of AI hype that's kicked off. What did you think AI capabilities would be in 2024 when you started the company?
So that's interesting. There's a couple of things people don't realize about People.ai. First of all, we were in the same YC batch, and like a couple months after incorporation as Scale AI and OpenAI. So There was definitely something happening in summer 2016 around understanding of what AI capabilities are going to be in the future. Second piece, I just had an interesting discovery related to podcasts. I recorded a podcast with Andreessen Horowitz in summer 2018, where we talked about, back then we didn't call it language models, but these AI capabilities that will be able to transformers, they'll be able to translate large amounts of unstructured data into human-like outputs, and will completely change the interfaces that we are interacting with to chatbot-style interfaces. So back then, that was the vision. The vision was that activity data of salespeople contains the signal to making salespeople more productive and effective, because it literally is a step-by-step telemetry of how you've done every deal in the past, successfully and unsuccessfully. Yep. And therefore, you should be able to use AI to augment humans initially and eventually kind of do fully automatic selling process. So that was the vision all along. It got there. It got there pretty fast, much faster than I expected. I actually have one of my fundraising decks, I think Series B, was saying we're going to get there by 2030. And then, so that was the situation.
And if you had to like predict out like 8 years from now, is it just like things kind of get better and better at some sort of linear or exponential rate, or is there some other like capability that we can't really think of that you think is going to be happening 8 years from now?
To be honest, I think the world is going to change completely, especially when it comes to sales, in 8 years. In fact, I'll throw in something controversial there. I think sales as we see it today is not going to exist. In reality, we're seeing this with kind of PLG and Stripe, where more and more or bigger and bigger sales transactions are happening literally through APIs. And so if you think about this, humans serve as translation layers on the buyer side as someone who understands requirements of your organization, summarizes the requirements of your organization to what needs to be acquired to improve the capabilities of your work. And on the seller side, humans are the translation layer between what your product can do and what the buyer wants. We've seen PLG, good product marketing, and more of kind of self-serve capabilities be able to translate more and more complex requirements on the buyer side and offerings on the seller side.
And these are like in some ways attacking the classic inside sales, right? Like they're
exactly
maybe lower dollar amounts, those types of things.
Yeah. So that has been happening even before AI. You could buy more and more expensive things online up until you could buy a Tesla without talking to a salesperson.
Yeah, I bought a car without talking to anybody, and it just kind of appeared in my driveway a few weeks later. It was amazing.
There we go. So what language models brought into that equation is they completely, like, you don't need humans translating requirements into a conversation or capabilities into a conversation anymore. It can be done with language models. It will take us a couple of years to get there fully. But I do see the world in 3 to 5 years where humans only do the human to human part, like go for dinner once in a while, etc. The rest of the work is being done fully with a language model talking to a language model.
Got it.
It's going to
So
be that
you're saying
simple.
not only is AI going to replace the salesperson, AI is going to replace the buyer.
Yes. And AI is enabling us to move more and more of the sophisticated, large transactions into fully digital, kind of like API level handshake mode.
Yeah.
You will be
Some of the
able to buy enterprise software or an airplane or whatnot the way you bought a Tesla.
yeah, the the thing when I bought a Tesla though, I was very familiar with the Tesla. I've seen my friends' Teslas. I understood what it was. I understood the brand pretty well. I had a sense of the dimensions and whether it would fit in my garage. Like all
Mm-hmm.
the like, I had a I kind of understood those things. Like how when you're buying something in a company, like there's all these weird like, well, does it even integrate with certain things? I don't even maybe even know to ask that question until like I
Mm-hmm.
try it out, or like there's a look and feel like a UI. If like a user's using it, though, maybe users won't use software as
Yeah.
much in the future. Um, like, how is that going to evolve?
So, and that's a great transition to the conversation about data companies versus AI companies here.
Yeah,
What's going to happen is you need very large training data sets or fine tuning data sets, the language model, the intuition around how every possible feature of a much more complex sales process works. Just like, I mean, Tesla has what, 50 features that are
yep,
variable? Let's say ERP software has 5,000 features that are variable. Then it becomes just a factor of how much data you had in a training set, how many times you've seen this transaction happen for the language model to be able to do the same job as you had with your Tesla, but just with 10 times more features or 1,000 times more features, etc.
yep. And I imagine there could be like an agent as a buyer to help you buy when you're selling you're
Yeah.
selling many times, and so you're constantly selling, you're constantly honing. When you're buying a piece of ERP software, you might be buying
Yep.
once every 10 years, and so you don't have that knowledge in your organization. And so if you worked with like a specific agent that buys all the time, that could be pretty valuable for you. Can you imagine those
Which
types of
leads me
things
to
happening?
cross customer data sets. Because if I were, even as a seller, I'll sell ERP to the same company once with this company's specific priorities,
Yeah,
etc. So having a cross customer data set where a number of customers pull together their selling experience the number of sellers pull together their selling experience across millions of transactions versus thousands of transactions they're seeing now in a way that doesn't violate anybody's privacy, security, confidentiality, all that stuff is already happening. And then the buyer side, I
yep,
mean, Coupas of the world or the next generation of Coupa software will be pulling together the procurement data across many buyers. I mean, that already exists, like Vantas of the world and whatnot, other companies that do SaaS buying for their companies, for their customers, pulling together buyer data, understanding the full end-to-end market of how that works, and then um, giving buyers network-based leverage is already happening manually. It will definitely be happening with AI. So now you will have an AI-based buyer that has seen you sell your thing in like 80% of your customers. An AI-based seller
yep.
on your side has seen how you sold to all customers and how other similar companies have sold to the same customer and other similar customers. It becomes an arms race of data sets at that point.
Interesting. And in in this world, are there other types of agents that help? Like, are there other types of external data sets that come in, or are there other types of like how does or is it just like one company to rule them all? Like, what happens? Is it more federated? It becomes more centralized? Like, because I can imagine if like one company is like in the middle of all these transactions, like that could be a good thing. Like maybe it becomes very efficient. but also like that company may have objectives that aren't the same objectives as the
Yeah.
buyers or the
I mean,
sellers.
first of all, that company, like we already have a company like that is doing that on the lower end of the market. It's Stripe. And Stripe is literally putting in a percentage fee on every transaction.
And
And
Google
Google
in some ways,
too.
right?
So there will be a Stripe of enterprise sales. Whether it's going to be Stripe or someone else is unclear. But someone, I think it's most likely to be Microsoft, will insert their fee, their cut in every enterprise transaction going back and forth. Which leads me to your initial question of how does it work? In reality, the hardest thing to get in that case is not the data sets, it's the human attention, the human eyeballs. And there are 4 companies that already have all the human eyeballs, like Microsoft with their Office 365 and business applications and Xbox and whatnot, already has probably 30-40% of your attention spent daily. So for them to start inserting additional utility that allows you to do bigger and bigger transactions fully automatically into that span is a matter of time. And so the way I see this market unfolding is that you'll have one or several platforms that already have human attention built in. So it's Microsoft, it's Google, it's a little bit of Salesforce, things like that, TikToks of the world. And then they will be running some kind of language model based universal prompt or inference engines. And then it's all about how many data sets you plug in into your inference engine to give an edge to your clients versus the other side. And so that's where this podcast was very interesting for me, besides you, Auren, is that people who are listening to you are the folks who are operating those data sets. And eventually it's going to be an arms race of getting access to unique data sets that will give the advantage to my seller or your buyer over the other side.
And how does that work when like are because we've already started to see some of these AI companies try to make proprietary deals to get access to data. But for most companies that sell data, still a very small percentage of their sales is to AI companies. For companies that maybe don't sell data, like traditionally, like a Reddit, it might be 100% of their sales. Like, how do you see that kind of market evolving?
So that's an interesting one, because I think the longer the companies do not sell their data to AI companies, the more leverage they have.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to worldofdas.com. The link is in the description below. Now back to the video.
For as long as you have a unique data set that nobody else can get. And
which most people don't have. Their data set isn't completely unique usually there's alternatives.
That's why you see media companies doing all these lawsuits, because they actually have unique data that is highly curated, human proved by MBAs and PhDs. Like, that's very hard to do. And so I think data rights is what will drive massive differentiation for AI models. And those AI models that have better differentiated data sets will drive much higher leverage and upside for the market. So this is kind of whatever data rights are being acquired today for unique data sets is times infinite when the AI starts using those data sets for at scale, high leverage transactions.
So if you're advising a data company, they could sell to multiple AI companies. They could sell to one as an exclusive. They could get a fixed fee. They could try to negotiate a variable fee, though I don't know how they would even do that. They could wait and not sell right now and sell in 2 years. Like, what would be your advice?
First, figure out how unique your data set is, because the more unique data set, and ideally the data set that disappears after you consume it, that nobody else can have the same data set, is very important.
And some of them are temporal too, right? So the temporal ones are more valuable than the non-temporal.
So first figure out how defensible you are. And then once you figure out that you have a very defensible temporal data set that contains the signal to something that drives economics, like in our case, sales activity data drives deals. Then the next question is, what is your strategy to maximize the economic value of the data set? And so if it's temporal, you can be selling it or leasing it to AI companies for specific temporum, so a specific period of time, or for specific, let's say last year's, this year's, whatever it is. I mean, there's many ways to do it, but the uniqueness of data set and inaccessibility of the data set through public data or other sources is what dictates your leverage.
Now, let's say you're not a data company, but you're a company that has interesting data as an exhaust. So let's say you're Hertz or Avis rental car, and you've got this really cool data about like all this different stuff about when people rent cars and where people go with those cars and how people use them, and probably all this other like really interesting data that probably could be valuable. How would you help those companies develop a data strategy?
That's a good question. So we knew this from the very beginning at People.ai. And while we have massive data sets, probably some of the biggest data sets about how sales are done on the planet and who they're done with, we never sold the data and we'll never sell the data. We knew all along that this data is going to be extremely valuable for fine-tuning the models for the benefit of all customers. Same story with Hertz and Avis, etc. I don't think they first have thought through yet all of the data collection they could be doing, like fleet telemetry data.
Yeah, they're probably only collecting like a very small percentage of the data that they could be. Yeah, because they could get even like the braking, and they could have cameras to see what's going on.
Pothole.
There's probably a lot of other really great data.
They could see economics. So why do people rent cars? Because they go somewhere with a purpose. They could see there's a lot of things they could do. In fact, what makes Tesla is not the car. It's the data set they collect every time you take over your steering wheel when you want to take over and the auto drive is messing up. And so the other self-driving cars are begging for that kind of data right now, and large fleets and understanding of the physical world through cars' eyes or sensors. I don't understand why Hertz or Avis have not outfitted every car they have with a ton of sensors and haven't become data companies yet.
It's a good point. Yeah, you're right. Because for a very small amount of money, they could, and they could even store that data locally. And then when you return it, usually return it within a week or so, then they could upload it to the Wi-Fi. So they don't even have to worry about the bandwidth or anything. They probably don't need that data in real time. And that could be really
if airplanes do that. So we work with one of the large airplane manufacturers, and they basically are they used to the fact that there is millions of sensors on every airframe, and every time they land in the airport, there is a big cable. If they plug in, that's a really big USB cable that downloads like a couple terabytes of data in a minute in between flights, so that then it goes into a massive cloud compute that processes all the data, teaches airplanes how to fly better every freaking time, but also does preventive maintenance. And they know that something is going to break 6 flights in advance. So they know that they make sure the part is waiting at the right airport at the right time, kind of thing.
Yeah. That's super cool. Now, when you're a big company, let's say you're a big airline company or some other type of company that's out there, you always have this kind of like discussion internally, like, should we be buying AI capabilities off the shelf and maybe tweaking them for our business? Should we be building our own niche models? Maybe we don't even have the talent internally to go do that. Like, how should a large Fortune 500 company be approaching this?
That's a very fun topic to talk about. So let's assume, where we're getting with People.ai, and I'll use sales as an example, but this is applicable in every other domain. Let's assume what we started the call with is that we have AI-based seller. Let's say today. What it means is that I can put out on the street infinite amount of sales capacity. And what I mean by that, it's not just a chatbot. Like you saw all the deepfake technologies and whatever that company is that does video avatars. There's a couple other ones we are working with one partner right there. This could be not me on this video right now. This could be my avatar that actually has studied everything I've ever said, both my personal email, but also my work stuff and all my blogs and everything.
And it makes you 30% funnier and more charismatic.
Exactly.
And,
I could just, my prompt could have been like, make Auren laugh and make a joke about this, and done. And off you go. And by the way, doing a good job. 50 or 500 or 5,000 of these podcasts right now. So when we can put out infinite sales capacity on the street, the economics of this planet completely change. It's kind of scary because
absolutely.
Imagine I'm Hertz or Avis. What if I could call on every customer that I have identified of mine, but also of my competitors? Because it's not hard to buy data on every person who's ever rented any car or who has a license or, I mean, you get the point. And if I could use that data, travel patterns, whatnot, to identify who's most likely to travel and rent the car in the next year, which I know exactly where to go right now to get 5 of those APIs plugged in together and get an understanding.
Sure.
The bottleneck is not identifying who could buy my stuff. The bottleneck is having humans in a call center today, dialing those people and reading the script of the screen to get them to rent from Hertz, not Avis. Now, if I can have a perfectly educated, perfectly enabled AI-based seller that talks, walks, and looks like me, but has human intelligence of 10,000 of me and people like me, or 10 million of me and people like me, having had those conversations, call on every Avis customer, and I'm Hertz, before noon tomorrow. And by call on, I mean not just phone, but retargeting, ads, outreach, email, text message, you name it.
Yeah.
And also have some kind of temporal element to it of these people are more likely to buy than those people. I could saturate the town and win the market against another public company literally overnight. The only limit to that is how many GPUs Amazon is running. And so if the other company has not been on the same strategy, doing similar offensive but also defensive measures, like someone calling on public companies 30% customers with a 10% conversion ratio in 24 hours, and then doing it again for 24 hours and doing it again for 24 hours nonstop, so that in 15 days you lost 30% of your market share and there's nothing you can do about it, completely changes how companies exist.
It's really interesting because, like, historically, there's been kind of two types of successful salespeople. There's been that relationship salesperson who builds a deep personal relationship, takes you to the ball game, has that type of, and then there's been like the product-oriented salesperson. Relationship-oriented salesperson maybe isn't as good as follow-up, maybe don't know the product as well, et cetera. And then there's more the product-oriented who's like got a whole process. And I would say in the last like 25 years, we've moved from where like the relationship-oriented salesperson was the dominant kind of breadwinner in a company to the product-oriented salesperson being the dominant breadwinner. But if AI takes over, it seems like the AI will be better at doing the product-oriented stuff faster than the relationship stuff. And we might see a resurgence of that relationship-oriented salesperson.
I wouldn't say it's a resurgence. There'll be less of them, but they'll be extremely more valuable. I literally, when we shipped our first
that's fair.
fully end-to-end AI autonomous agent last December, I was at a Christmas party in Toronto with one of my top salespeople, and she just went through enablement on how to sell these AI capabilities that scale infinitely, basically. She comes up to me and she's like, Oleg, is this the end of my career? I'm like, no, not yet. In fact, let me give you an analogy. We've had autopilot on airplanes for 30, 40 years. And today on small Cessnas and Cirruses, autopilot, no problem. Get on and they'll be the first planes to completely take off and land fully automatically. I mean, small drones are that. Yet, when you're flying a big super jumbo plane, you'll still have 2 and eventually maybe only 1 pilot because you want human being there as a co-pilot to a full autopilot in case the autopilot messes up and you have so much responsibility to land the plane.
Yeah, something goes wrong. Like every 5 flights, something goes wrong, and
you need to have a human there
or whatever. Yeah.
But let me give you an analogy.
Yeah.
I was talking to our airplane manufacturing customer, their chief customer commercial officer, and I'm like, "What's the biggest leverage for your business?" And they're like, "Oh, the biggest leverage for our business is using AI to make sure there is only one pilot in the cockpit, not two." Why? Because he's like, we can make all the airplanes in the world. There's not enough pilots. By just putting AI in a cockpit to replace the core pilot and have a human there be for safety, compliance, etc., we literally double our TAM. And we drop the travel prices on the planet in half because now there is twice as many flights. So to your point, going back to the salesperson,
and a lot of times why a reason a flight gets canceled is, one of the pilots gets sick, or you have all these other things that could happen.
And AI doesn't sleep, doesn't go on vacation, doesn't join unions, all that stuff. I mean, for unions, we will see if that happens. But to the original question you asked, I think the strategic, most experienced sellers will be the only type of sellers remaining. And there's downsides to that as well. Because one, AI is very good at replicating the playbook that's already established when you collect the telemetry. So there'll be, in a big company has now 10,000 salespeople, there'll be 50 salespeople who are the most high-end sellers on the planet. They will think they're selling. Their job is to sell.
Yeah.
In reality, their job is to teach AI how to sell. And so humans will still be figuring out the playbook. AI will be replicating and scaling it out.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're a tiny company which still searching for product market fit, you still need to have that. Then the AI is going to be it's a little bit harder to use AI to replace.
And so the interesting part is that while humans will be coaches to AI, we'll see a much bigger problem over time, which is who's going to coach humans. Just like in engineering right now with GitHub Copilot, there's no more need for junior engineers. Like the AI acts as a junior engineer right now and just helps really experienced people do more faster, and that's it. Same story will happen in sales, where AI is the perfect sidekick. You don't longer need inside sales, junior salespeople, etc. If 50 high-end sellers can do the thing.
And it seems like the SDR seems very automatable. Like most of the stuff an SDR does. In fact, a good SDR today is just like using it's just coordinating 10 tools. They're just like a coordinator of the tools, but they're not doing as much of the outreach. And it seems like we'll see way more of those things start to happen.
I mean, to be honest, like SDR automation, the only reason why SDR automation hasn't happened is the way fully is that the cost structure of automating SDRs scales not with number of users, but with number of contexts or accounts. So like the only reason why SDRs are automated is the LLM inference cost. We're talking now about automating SMB, mid-market, and even lower enterprise sales teams. Initially in a copilot mode, but eventually you won't be needing a steering wheel in your car either,
Yeah. And while that amazing seller on your team probably won't get replaced anytime soon, for the sellers that are worried about it, how should they be thinking about their own careers?
Lean into AI and learn how to become the most AI-enabled high-end seller you can be. That's the best job security.
Just like being a software developer, it's leaning into Copilot or leaning into whatever.
In fact, I believe that 2022 was the year with the most salespeople on the planet. So all the layoffs, etc. Obviously, a lot of it was performance-based or headcount-based, whatever it is. But the same number of headcount is not getting rehired. By the time companies are back to full steam hiring, you'll be hiring AI agents, not people.
Yeah, interesting. The random aside, but you have this amazing domain name, People.ai. How did you get that?
We also
Is there a story behind it, or?
Yeah, we have BDR.ai
That's another
and a whole bunch of other ones.
Oh,
The
wow.
story
Okay.
there is
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're just like on the secondary market collecting these like
no,
great
actually
domain
simpler.
names or
I worked for this company called H2O.ai before starting People.ai. And one morning when I decided to start a company, I was sitting down in a diner in Menlo Park with a couple of friends. And we were like, well, let's take a look. And there was only one domain name, a registrar doing .ai domain names in February 3rd, 2016. I remember that. It was called onlydomains.com.
okay.
And we just went heavy at it. And like I ended up buying like 60 or 70 primary like first word.ai domain names.
Oh my gosh. So
Everything was
so
available
in
in February
2016
2016.
the dot AI domain name wasn't as well, because I feel like I thought I had seen it, but maybe you're right. Maybe it was
Yeah.
like 2018 before I started seeing a lot of
Or
the
by
dot
that
AI
summer, it was all
domain
gone.
names.
Like I was literally like probably in the last moment when it
Yeah.
was available. We bought like customer success.ai, like inside sales.ai, account executive.ai. Like we went heavy on that and spent probably like $3,000-$4,000 in a portfolio that's worth much more now.
Got it. So, and I believe .ai is this like country of
Yeah.
Anguilla, is the country that has it, and I think it's like British protectorate or something. So I guess there's probably some kind of rule of law. They're not going to just all of a sudden just say like, hey, tomorrow you need to, I can imagine like a more extracting type of thing. Like I believe like I think it was one of the countries was like one of the domains that was popular like 15 years ago was like owned by Libya or something. And so you could see how they
Yeah.
could like be a little bit more extracting on your
I mean,
domain name.
I would be very curious to find out what is the percentage of Anguilla's GDP that is coming from registering .ai domain names now, because I'm sure they're getting a quite significant inflow there.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. And that's great. That's amazing that you're able to do that. I mean, I think those brands really are important. They might not be important to selling to AIs in the future, but they're very important to selling to people. Like people do when they see something like where it says people.ai or sales.ai, that means a lot to somebody, rather than, you can imagine like people underscore sales.ai is just not as compelling of a name.
No, for sure.
Now you personally describe yourself as a born seller. And what would be your advice for CEOs that never really saw themselves in a selling role?
Well, you are.
Is it just like not going to be as important in the future?
Well,
or?
I mean, right now you got to know how to sell, because it's fundraising is selling, recruiting is selling, building a team.
Can you imagine the fundraising side and recruiting side? Like you could imagine having like an agent. And then it would be a little weird. Like then in the middle of it, someone's going to be like, okay, am I really talking to the CEO or am I talking to the CEO's agent? Right. And then you're not talking to the real CEO right now, but like if you pass this round, then the next round, you'll actually talk to him live.
Well, I mean, I have a couple things about that. One is if SBF was able to raise money while playing computer games, and he raised billions of dollars that way, I don't think agents will be that much worse than SBF spending 10% of his attention span on fundraising in real time. But second piece there is that I actually think VC job is safe for now, just because the number of reps or transactions that are happening is so low versus mid-market enterprise selling. It's
a lot of
exactly
feel and
that
stuff.
Collecting enough telemetry data on venture transactions to build a meaningful agent experience of that is actually really hard. Like even the biggest firms, your Andreessen, your Sequoia, probably don't have even 1% of transaction volume that's needed to make a VC agent work really well. And same story on the founder side.
Well, but let me push back on that a little bit. Like a lot of times you get an inbound and it's hard to know if it's worth your call if you're a VC, because it's 30 minutes, you got to schedule it. And, so oftentimes you don't even take the call, but it could be 1% of the time of things you don't take are just like an amazing company, but you just didn't go around to actually taking the call. Maybe you hire some super junior people to take as many calls as possible, but that's kind of a similar thing where they could have you probably have kind of a core list of things of information you want to get from them. You probably have a few kind of questions that are, and yeah, maybe it's not as good as you personally, but it could get there. And you could
Yeah.
even be honest with the company. Hey, you didn't make it to the bar of me personally
Yeah.
getting on the phone with you, but you made it to the
Yeah.
bar of my agent getting to the phone with you. And they'll have a kind of a quick conversation with you. Don't want to
Yeah.
waste your time. And then I can get on if it gets
Venture
to the next
capital
level.
associates, I wouldn't want to be in that job anytime soon, just because I think
Yeah.
agent on agent initial triage, definitely 100%.
Yeah, the CEO could have an agent, and the venture capital firm could have an agent, and you could just be figuring out right away if there's like a fit to then get a little bit more
So
deeper.
that will be. I would be surprised if that's not happening right now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Recruiting, what I imagine, is a similar thing where like one of the biggest bottlenecks to me to hiring is just doing the calls with all these people. It takes a lot of time to recruit people, to talk to them, to have meaningful conversations, even if you optimize it to a 20-minute call or something. It's and you just need to schedule, and you need to like break up your day, et cetera. So it's very hard to do, and engineers hate it. Engineers hate having to recruit and go talk to all these people. So you can imagine at least the early things. And sometimes you already do that. Like you may put a test at the front of recruiting, or you can imagine some of the more early stuff being done with AI.
I was with a CEO of a top 3 industrial manufacturing company on the planet this Tuesday in DC. And she told me something really interesting. She's like, all this AI white collar automation thing, she's like, we've been doing it for decades. It's called digital twins. We've been building digital twins of wind turbines and generators and trains and planes and whatnot. And
That's
we
right.
would test how things behave with an environment, simulated environment, or how the two digital twins operate with each other. So like what we're talking here about is creating digital twins of humans in certain roles. From that perspective, it's not that different. We just needed a better interface, which is language models.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, a few questions about Ukraine. You're really involved in Ukraine. First of all, I know that you guys had a lot of employees in Ukraine, and you were very kind of proactive of moving out of the country, even like months before the invasion. How did you have a sense that invasion was coming? Was it just obvious because there's all these like tanks at the border, or how do you have like a good sense that was coming?
There was a number of things there. There was tanks on the border, but also just a simple pattern matching. When Russian leader, dictator, or whatever you want to call him now, started saying things and drawing red lines that obviously were leading to war, like I just assumed that people of that caliber do not change their mind or don't step back from their word easily.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting. There's kind of like different types of people out there. And I'm actually like you. Like when a leader says something, I just believe that. Like whatever they say, I believe. If they say they're going to do something, I believe that's what they do. And then there's like people who are like much smarter than me. And when a leader says something, well, he's not really going to do that. And so there's different ways of like analyzing.
Whether they're good or bad, to become a leader of a large entity like a country, you gotta do what you said you're gonna do consistently. Therefore, I remember it was November before Ukraine war started, where I was like, whoa, things are being said that cannot be walked back.
This is November 2021.
Things are being said that cannot be walked back. In fact, I remember I took my parents to Cabo for vacation in November 2021 over Thanksgiving. And I was actually spending part of my vacation scouting for where we would bring our team from Ukraine to Mexico. Similar time zone, doesn't need a visa.
Okay, because they could get Mexico. Mexico is easy visa from Ukraine, whereas the US would be very difficult.
Easy for Ukrainians, no visa needed. You can live there, lots of hotels available, etc. I had a conviction that it's going to happen back in November. And then I have a lot of friends in Ukrainian government. I'm from there. I'm from the same town as Zelensky and a whole bunch of people. And so they were not kidding. Like things were grim and people were preparing. And so that's when I came back early December 2021 and told my team, like, hey, we need contingency plans. So we built out all the way to printed Google Maps for our team. We forced everybody to get their passports. We forced everybody to vaccinate their dogs and cats and get all the COVID paperwork, because back then it was still COVID, so that we could get people mobile quickly. And then in January, we literally paid people to go on vacation in Europe, kind of thing. I recall calling one of my first engineers who was on his honeymoon in somewhere and saying, hey, what if we double the length of your honeymoon? Just stay there. Don't come back. And we literally did that. And so that's how a lot of the team ended up being outside of the country.
Now, one of the interesting things, like when that you and I had talked in the past about, is when Zelensky first ran for the election for president, he was one of his big supporters were these software developers. Why were software developers such a powerful bloc in Ukraine?
So that's a very interesting story. So 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and attacked eastern Ukraine, Obama administration did not come to help. They kind of like, Russia, you're bad, some lightweight sanctions, but they didn't even give Ukraine money to do anything. So Ukrainian government was forced to print money. And so when they printed money, I think the Ukrainian currency devalued from like 8 to 1 to like 25 to 1 in like 1 year to $1.
Wow. Got it. So it lost
lost two-thirds of its value. There was one group of people in Ukraine, unlike Russia, that was making money in US dollars directly. And these were all the software developers. Because the Ukrainian market is too small.
Yeah. You're paying them. You're paying them in dollars because the currency risk was probably via whatever PayPal back then or something.
Payoneer, all those things.
Whatever the monthly fee is.
So the difference in Russia and Ukraine was really big, because in Russian market it's big enough. You have Yandex, you have your own Uber, your own eBay, your own whatever, your own Google.
Yeah.
They would all work for local companies for internal market. They would be paid in rubles.
Yeah,
exactly.
And get paid in rubles.
Ukraine market is too small. Everybody was working for foreign companies paid in dollars. So when currency devalued, Ukrainian engineers ended up actually increasing their relative income versus the rest of the Ukrainian population, because
they could afford an apartment 3 times bigger. They could go to the best restaurants. They can go to all these different things. Because relative, like on a PPP basis, they went from like middle class to wealthy.
And then combine that with 2016, 17, 18 is when Silicon Valley started hiring people anywhere because there was not enough engineers. So demand globally went up, and their even dollar salaries started growing really quickly. So suddenly,
because I remember like people in Ukraine were like, fourth of a U.S. engineer, and then all of a sudden they become half the U.S. engineer, and all of a sudden they become 60-70% of U.S. engineer, like their salaries start rising pretty quickly.
3 times the PPP income versus Ukraine. Suddenly the engineering jobs started making you into like top 1% earner in the country. And then Ukrainian government, what Zelensky did was really good. They extended the regime where engineers could have a subsidized 5% income tax in Ukraine. It's like indirect. There's a whole thing there, but the government supports it, and engineers pay 5% income tax there. And so, crazy.
Why is that? Is it just because like otherwise they would just avoid taxes, so they weren't getting any?
That's one thing, but I actually think in the long run, that was a very smart governmental policy.
Just encouraging more people
Suddenly,
to become
if you look at
software
enrollment
developers.
in Ukrainian engineering schools, it went from like 10,000 to like 150,000 people a year in 2016. Suddenly, all the pop bands started seeing like, it's cool to be a developer. I want to marry a developer. Like all that stuff, you would go to.
Because those are the people going to their concerts. So they don't can afford to go to the concerts.
You go to a club, like people who are spending money were engineers. People who were traveling to Europe were engineers. In fact, here's a story. We tried to relocate during that time a few engineers back like to Canada or US because of time zones. And people are like, why would I go to where on PPP parity, I'm a
Right.
middle class and I have to have 50% tax.
Right. Even if you pay me 30, 50% more, I'm
Yeah.
losing
So
massive.
people just would not
Yeah.
do that. And so, and then the
Yeah.
next thing that happens is this increase in everybody wants to be an engineer, not a doctor or a lawyer, happens in 2015, 16. 4 years later, 2020, the first big cohorts of engineers start being released, graduating. 150,000 in 2020.
Okay. And that's right in
120
time for COVID.
COVID is taking
Yeah.
off. And now it suddenly doesn't matter where engineers are. Salaries
Yeah.
become on par. Companies like Deal come out and make
Yeah.
hiring an engineer in Ukraine one click. Suddenly that is taking off even further.
Yeah.
They don't want to travel. They make a lot of money. They like being in Ukraine.
In fact, they weren't even allowed to travel in that year
But then
straight.
in COVID, Kiev
Yep.
had really liberal COVID policies. So all of Europe.
All right. So people started moving there, right? Like I know people who like moved there
So
from
Ukraine
London
became
even,
like the
who
Florida of Europe at the time during COVID. So suddenly we're here, we're engineers, we're making a ton of money, and Europeans are now coming in to hang out with us and open Michelin star restaurants over here.
It's like the cool
spot.
place.
Yeah. And so that happened under Zelensky. And so why would you not support the guy who is giving you 5% tax rate and is making your country a cool place with policies and is young and hip and all that stuff? And then the war happens, and these people, unfortunately or fortunately, were not as strong of believers in Russia attacking and all that stuff, so they stayed in the country. Now, that is one of the reasons why Ukraine is doing relatively well in the war, is because
they got a tech talent
stayed,
base,
and that tech talent went to the front lines, got the drones working, got the innovation going, software, all that Starlinks, all that stuff that we all know about now.
And one interesting thing about Ukraine that I didn't really know about until I met you was that it has kind of a super app where citizens can do almost anything related to interacting with the government, getting a driver's license, paying your taxes, all this kind of thing. And a few countries have this, but it seems like Ukraine is certainly at the forefront. How did that evolve?
So that's as a Ukrainian, that's something I'm really proud of. The current Minister of Digital Transformation, Michael Fedorov, had a thesis, which is like corruption happens when SQL databases are not joined. Which, if you think about it's true,
shadows,
like when you have your driver license and driver test databases not joined, and when you insert a record for someone not doing a driver test, and then that's not going to kick off cascade effects in 15 other databases, you can do it in a shadow and take money for inserting rows in a database. But if everything is joined and suddenly you do this and your medical record updates and your voting record updates and everything, suddenly you cannot do corruption anymore. So the thesis Ukrainian government had is let's join everything we can. And they started with a mobile app. And first they started with, I believe, driver licenses. And then driver licenses were joined to tax ID, and then it was joined to your real estate transactions. And then they have a payment processing system there. And then suddenly you could pay taxes online. And then they're like, well, let's just do medical records too. And then they said, well, you can only do a COVID test and leave the country during COVID, but you can only do a COVID test through the government medical record system. Therefore, go to your doctor and update your data.
So encourage
and
more
we're going to
people
connect
to
the
go
passport
do it.
data, so it's one-click update. And now they're doing military service registry this way. So the whole country has joined every freaking database in a single data model. And it's kind of insane. And so the app itself, I think it's cool. It's easy, great UX. They copied all the Apple-esque stuff there. Super easy to use. But the app is the tip of the iceberg for the country to have joined every possible database into a single data fabric.
And so essentially they have all these like microservices and APIs that go between all the different 100%. Databases.
Like US is super federated in comparison with Ukraine. Like Social Security and immigration don't talk to each other. Like you still have to do fax in between or something.
Correct.
Yeah. In Ukraine, Social Security, medical systems, conscription systems, military procurement, and street lights and traffic fines are all connected.
It's amazing because, like, I don't know if this would be good to do in the U.S., but I'm confident that the U.S. would not be able to pull it off. Like, it is just like you have to get like these super amazing, talented people in there, and in the U.S. they'd probably have like some like Booz Allen like created, and it would cost like $30 billion, and then they would get out something super buggy that no one would want to use or something. Like, I assume it wasn't like that. I assume it was a group of like a ragtag group of like 5 super sharp engineers who are working throughout the night to make something like that. Like, how did that
started with so the current minister used to be a startup founder. And he came in and they had to build a ministry from scratch. That was Zelensky's mandate. And so what they did that was really cool, they basically didn't build the ministry based on the textbook of how to build a ministry. Actually, there was no textbook of how to build a new ministry. Like, well, let's do it like a startup. So they basically built a ministry based on Scrum teams with product managers, with project managers, they run on Jira and Asana and the whole thing. And so it was like 100-person ministry that was operating massive scale. So like, I remember an example of like, they were doing budget acquisitions for a census. Like a census is a multi-billion-dollar freaking thing for any country, right? And these guys were like, well, we have 3 major cell phone providers in the country. Everybody has a cell phone. Some people have few, so we just need to compare GPS location data of 2 SIM cards to see if 2 SIM cards always travel together. It must be the same person. And so if we just resolve that duplication, we now can run a census literally through SIM IDs. And they got census done for like a fraction of a cost in 2 weeks.
Yeah, then you just have to figure out like all you have to do is figure out then the kids and the elderly from there, and then you're done. Yeah.
But then in Ukraine, they actually drove a program they were even at some point giving out free Android phones to elderly, because when they got to this position and free classes, because when they got to this digital situation, they realized that government services through mobile app are like 1,000 times cheaper. And so they could find massive leverage in headcount that doesn't need to be in the government. And the only people who were using the headcount were elderly. So therefore, let's educate elderly to use Android app. And you don't have to have as many people sitting in the counter and accepting paperwork.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, back to People.ai. At least 90% of the founders who go on this podcast have a co-founder. And I think you're the sole founder of People.ai. And also went through like YC in the early days like that. Like, how did you think about it, and how did that kind of come about? And you wish you had like a co-founder you could commiserate with, and would you suggest other people do something like that?
To be honest, I wish I had a co-founder. And I think there is a loneliness aspect here. And no matter how good and how close you are with your executive team, it's not the same. How I get by is I have a group of friends, founders, and we commiserate. I'm part of YPO. It's been an incredible experience. Highly recommend for everybody who is a solo founder to go through YPO. Now, I do feel in hindsight that being a solo founder also reduces your chances for success for all obvious reasons, but also you have to hire executives earlier because you're just by yourself. And so you basically dilute yourself much more, hiring early, raising more money earlier, hiring executives earlier, churning executives earlier because they came in too early and all that stuff, because you're a solo founder.
Weren't the right fit.
And so in hindsight, I wish I'd spent a bit more time kind of really honing in on building an initial founding team. And anything in the future I'm going to do, I'm not going to be solo.
Okay, interesting. I love it. Now, back to Ukraine, I think most Americans don't have as much awareness of Ukraine kind of pre-Russian invasion. They may have like some idea that, obviously like at some point it was part of the Soviet Union and stuff. As someone who grew up there, what do you think most people in the U.S. like understood or knew about Ukraine?
I'll go straight to like the hot political button right now of There's multiple camps. They're saying, some of them are saying, we got to fight with Ukraine all the way to the end and supply them, not going to get in the fight, but give them weapons. Another side says, hey, it's a local conflict. Like if we create a truce between Russia and Ukraine, we can kick the can down the road and stuff like that. Like most of the West is looking at this as a 2-year or maximum 10-year conflict. When you are in Ukraine, you look at this as a 1,000-year conflict. The Ukraine was started in Kiev Rus in 1912. No, not 1912, 912. So over 1,000 years ago. Moscow was started 300-400 years later. There is a popular meme of like the picture of Kiev, which is like in 900s, which is like looks like any medieval European city, like built out, like looks like Venice or Venice level of sophistication, churches, big buildings, stuff like that. And then the other side of the meme is like, meanwhile in Moscow, it's just like forest. But where I'm going with that is Russia had been coming to Ukraine and killing a bunch of Ukrainians for 1,000 years, probably every 50 years. Every time Ukraine didn't fight back, a bunch of Ukrainians died. Every time Ukrainians fought back, Russians would, and it was only 2 or 3 times where they did it successfully, Russians would retreat, but then wait for the opportune moment and come back again. And even more Ukrainians would die. So while in the US, the outlook on this is a 10-year thing, 2-year thing, make peace, and off we go to the next election. In Ukraine, it's like, this is the one time when we are actually successfully holding them back. The first time since like 1648, I believe, when Ukrainian Cossacks were holding Russians off. And if we give up now, they'll come back at much more opportune US president, much more opportune European situation when the right-wing people are in power or whatnot. And they will not forget. And so either we deal with it now or our kids deal with it at much worse odds. That's how Ukraine looks at it.
And why does the odds get worse over time? Like you think like certain demographics are in Ukraine's favor versus Russia. There's other types of things. So why is it worse for Ukraine 20 years from now?
Russia's biggest mistake in this war was to start the war during the last US president who remembers Cold War. In 5-7 years, the president will not have, had this war not happened in 5 years, the next US president or the one after that would not have had that DNA level fear of nuclear war, of Cold War, of all the things that Biden remembers. Like even Obama did not have it on this level. And so, I think next, when Russia comes back, if the job is not finished now, they will come back during US president. They'll be much more thoughtful about who is in charge in the US and Europe to pick their moment when to come back. And Ukraine is going to be all alone again, like it was in 2014. Or,
but any scenario, even if Russia's quote unquote defeated now, I assume they're going to try again in 10 years, right?
Yeah, the question is, what is the defeated situation? Like there is from Russia rolling back to Russia. Like in 1991, Russia shedded a third of its population into 20 other countries. Well, that could happen again.
Yep. All right, this is great. 2 last questions we ask all of our guests. What is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
Oh, that's an interesting one. The conspiracy theory I believe in
Maybe it's a Russia one. I don't know. I mean, I assume you seem like a guy who's got some really good conspiracy theories.
There's the things I'm trying to not share something very sensitive. my issue is that I have access to some classified information, and it's very important not to share it.
Please don't. Yeah, we're being recorded.
I think there is just too much coincidence in the amount of facts and things that are happening between Trump and Ukraine in some way. The Ukrainian servers that he was talking about, the Zelensky-Trump conflict from 2020, I believe, during the previous elections. And then Trump pushing on Ukraine in terms of disengaging from helping Ukraine, and so on and so on. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some kind of Russia connection and Russia leverage there.
Interesting. Okay, so that's a deep conspiracy.
Yeah, like I actually, it's just way too much attention, way too much stuff even before the war happened. Way too many, like, why not some other random pick a country, you know?
Yeah. Okay. All right. This is, I love hearing the conspiracies of the conspiracy. So,
Yeah.
all right. Last question we ask all of our guests. What conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
You know, before starting People.ai, I had done 2 companies and I never raised venture capital. And they weren't huge outcomes, but they were good outcomes for me and stuff like that. And I regret following conventional VC advice in 2019, 20, like go, sales capacity, hire, build.
Yep.
Versus building a healthy, promising, fundamentally sound business.
Yeah, because you guys raised probably $100 million at this point or so. $200 million. Okay, yeah, that's a lot. So you think maybe in retrospect you could have raised less money or something, or?
Yeah, I could have raised less money. I could have burned less money. I could have not scaled up my sales team a couple times before AI happened. Like, we always knew that AI is coming. We always knew our data is valuable, but our interface, like consuming massive amounts of data through tables and charts and graphs, is cool, but it's not the end user interface.
That's right.
And so we always had data product market fit. We didn't have UX product market fit. But because it was a go scenario, and that was the topic du jour, like how quickly can you scale, we did the same thing as many other companies did in terms of scaling up sales team before we had the ultimate product market fit, which came with language models.
Interesting. Okay, that's great. That's really great advice. Very helpful. Thank you, Oleg, for joining us on World of DaaS. I follow you at OlegR on X, but you don't really tweet that much. I'm also follow you on LinkedIn. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has been a ton of fun.
Thank you, Auren.
And if you're a super data nerd, go to worldofdaas.com. That's DAAS, worldofdaas.com, and sign up for our weekly Data as a Service news roundup newsletter.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider rating this podcast and leaving a review. For more World of DaaS, and DaaS is DAAS, you can subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. And also check out YouTube for videos. You can find me at Twitter at Auren, that's AUREN, Auren, and we'd love to hear from you.